The cry for help. The massive viewing deck of Galactic Trade Station Nexus 7 offered a spectacular view of the Andromeda shipping lanes, but today nobody was admiring the scenery. Emergency lights cast red shadows across the faces of dozens of different alien species, all gathered for what might be the most desperate plea for help in galactic history. Captain Sarah Chen stood near the back of the crowd, her human height allowing her to see over most of the assembled delegates. At 35, she had spent the last decade as Earth's primary trade representative in this sector, building relationships and establishing trust with species whose biology she still didn't fully understand. Today, however, trade was the furthest thing from her mind. At the center of the crowd, Ambassador Zethkar was dying, not from disease or injury, but from exhaustion and grief. The insectoid being's normally iridescent carapace had dulled to a sickly gray color, and his 4 arms trembled as he struggled to maintain his dignity before the assembled representatives. Zethkar belonged to one of the galaxy's most peaceful species. The Zethkari had never waged war, never conquered other worlds, and spent their centuries-long lifespans creating art and music that brought joy to dozens of worlds. Their homeworld, Zeth Prime, was considered one of the most beautiful planets in known space, with crystal forests that sang in the wind and aurora displays that could be seen from orbit. All of that was gone now. Honored delegates, Zethkar began, his translated voice barely audible through the chamber speakers. I come before you as the last representative of my people. Our world is lost. Our children are dead. Everything we built over 10,000 years has been consumed. The holographic display behind him activated, showing images that made several delegates look away in horror. Zeth Prime appeared on the screen, but it was no longer the jewel world they remembered. The crystal forests had been reduced to empty craters. The singing valleys were silent and barren. Where once stood beautiful cities with spires that reached into the clouds, now there was only empty earth. 3 months ago, Zethkar continued, the harvesters found us. A collective shudder ran through the crowd. The harvesters were every spacefaring civilization's nightmare, mechanical swarms that appeared without warning and consumed entire planets for raw materials. They were self-replicating machines, each one capable of building dozens more of itself from any available matter. No one knew who created them or why they existed, only that once they found a world, they never stopped until every atom of useful material had been processed. We sent out distress calls as soon as they arrived, Zethkar said, images of the mechanical swarms filling the display. The harvesters looked like metallic spiders the size of cargo containers, but they moved with terrifying coordination. By the time help could arrive, 70% of our population was gone. The survivors fled to our outer colonies, but the harvesters followed us. They always follow. Sarah felt her jaw clench as she watched the footage. She had seen recordings of harvester attacks before, but this was different. These weren't military targets or industrial worlds. These were civilians, artists, philosophers, and children. The Zethkari had no weapons, no defensive fleets, nothing but their beauty and their music. The harvesters have consumed 6 of our colony worlds, Zethkar continued. They strip away everything. Soil, water, even the atmosphere. They leave nothing but empty rock floating in space. Of the 40 billion Zethkari who lived 3 months ago, fewer than 200 million remain, scattered across refugee ships and temporary shelters. The ambassador's voice cracked as he spoke. We have run out of places to hide. Our ships are breaking down. Our people are dying of diseases we cannot treat. The harvesters are still following us, and we cannot outrun them forever. He turned to face the assembled delegates directly. I beg you, honored representatives, help us. We will trade anything we have left. We will serve in whatever capacity you require. We will bind our people to yours for 1,000 years if necessary. Just please, help us survive. The chamber fell silent. Sarah could see the representatives exchanging glances, calculating costs and benefits. The Zethkari had always been valuable trading partners, their artistic works prized throughout the galaxy, but helping them would mean taking on the harvesters. That was a risk few species were willing to accept. Council Prime Velterra, the elegant leader of the Galactic Trade Consortium, was the first to speak. Her species, the Altarians, were known for their diplomatic skills and careful consideration of all options. "Ambassador Zethkar," she said gently, "the consortium sympathizes with your plight. However, the harvesters represent a threat beyond the capabilities of any single species. We must consider what aid we can realistically provide." One by one, the delegates began offering assistance. The Korathan Republic offered 3 patrol ships and emergency medical supplies. The Vegan Collective promised research data on harvester behavior patterns. The Centauri Alliance offered temporary housing for 50,000 refugees on their border worlds. Each offer was carefully measured, Sarah noticed. Enough to show good faith and maintain diplomatic relationships, but not enough to put their own species at significant risk. It was practical, rational, and completely inadequate. As the offers continued, Sarah found herself thinking about her own species' recent history. Humans had only joined the galactic community 30 years ago, after developing faster-than-light travel. They were still considered newcomers by most standards, their world classified as a death world, due to its dangerous environment and the aggressive nature of its inhabitants. Most species saw humans as useful but unpredictable allies. They were excellent fighters when needed, skilled engineers, and surprisingly good at forming personal bonds with other species. But they were also known for their emotional responses and their tendency to take on problems that weren't technically their responsibility. "Captain Chen," Council Prime Velterra said, drawing Sarah from her thoughts. "Does Earth wish to contribute to the relief effort?" Sarah looked around the room at the faces of dozens of different species, all waiting to see what the humans would offer. She could see the calculations in their eyes. Humans had perhaps 20 ships in this sector, a modest trade fleet with minimal military capability. They would probably offer some supplies, maybe an escort ship or 2. But as Sarah looked at Ambassador Zethkar, saw the exhaustion in his compound eyes and the defeat in his posture, she felt something ignite in her chest. It was the same feeling her ancestors had experienced when they saw injustice, when they encountered bullies picking on those who couldn't defend themselves. It was the feeling that had driven humans to fight against overwhelming odds throughout their history. "We'll take care of it," Sarah said simply. The chamber buzzed with confused murmurs. Velterra tilted her head in the Altarian gesture of polite confusion. "I'm sorry, Captain Chen. Could you clarify what assistance Earth is offering?" Sarah pulled out her quantum communicator, a device that could send messages instantly across thousands of light years. "I need to make a call to Earth. This will just take a moment." The delegates watched in bewilderment as Sarah activated the communicator and began speaking rapidly in human language. The translation system struggled to keep up with her rapid-fire conversation, catching only fragments like "full deployment authorization" and "everything we have," and yes, I mean everything. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. Sarah closed the communicator and looked back at the assembled representatives. "It's done," she said. "Our response fleet will begin arriving within the week." Zethkar stared at her, with hope and confusion mixed in his alien features. "Captain Chen, how many ships?" Sarah paused, as if calculating. "The first wave will be approximately 800 vessels. More will follow as needed." The chamber erupted in shocked voices. 800 ships was larger than most species' entire space forces. The humans were talking about a military response on a scale that hadn't been seen since the Great Wars centuries ago. "Captain Chen," Velterra said carefully, "are you authorized to commit Earth's military resources on this scale?" Sarah smiled, and there was something in that expression that made several delegates step back involuntarily. It wasn't malicious, but it was predatory in a way that reminded everyone present that humans came from a world where they had been apex predators. "Council Prime," Sarah said, "when humans adopt someone as family, we don't do things halfway." The Zethkari asked for help. They'll have it. As Sarah walked out of the chamber to coordinate with Earth, she could hear the buzz of confused and concerned voices behind her. The other species were beginning to realize that they had seriously misjudged what humans considered an appropriate response to a crisis. What they didn't understand was that Sarah's call to Earth had activated protocols that had been in place since humanity's first contact with alien species. Earth's military planners had always known that their world's reputation as a death world meant they would be expected to handle the galaxy's most dangerous problems. They had prepared accordingly. Within hours of Sarah's call, every human military base in known space received the same message. Operation Zeth Carry Shield was now active. This was not a limited engagement or a police action. This was total war against an enemy that threatened an entire species, and humans did not believe in proportional responses. The quantum message reached Earth's Solar Defense Command at exactly 8:42 Greenwich Mean Time. Admiral Marcus Webb was reviewing fleet readiness reports when his communications officer burst into his office. "Admiral, priority alpha message from the Nexus 7 sector. Captain Chen is requesting immediate deployment authorization for full fleet response." Webb activated his secure terminal and read Sarah's report. An entire species facing extinction from harvester swarms. Galactic community offering token assistance that would accomplish nothing. 200 million refugees with nowhere to run. Webb reached for his emergency communicator. Within minutes, he was connected to Earth's president, the colonial defense minister, and the heads of all major military branches. "How bad is it?" President Martinez asked from her office in Geneva. "Complete species extinction within months." Webb replied, "Harvester swarms have consumed multiple worlds. The galactic community is offering research data and patrol ships. Captain Chen has committed us to full response. What do we need to deploy?" Webb pulled up the tactical assessment. "Everything, Madam President. This is bigger than the Centauri campaign, bigger than the Vegan border war. We need full fleet deployment, complete military mobilization, and every piece of advanced technology we have." President Martinez was quiet for a moment. Then, "Authorization granted. Use everything we have," and Martinez's voice hardened. "And make sure the galaxy understands that this is what happens when you threaten Earth's friends." Within 1 hour of Sarah's call, Earth's military-industrial complex began mobilizing on a scale not seen since the Human-Borthan War 50 years ago. The First Fleet, stationed at Luna Base, received immediate deployment orders. The massive fleet of 847 vessels began emergency preparations for deep space travel. Admiral Rebecca Torres, commander of the First Fleet, supervised the preparation from her flagship, the EDS Retribution. The massive dreadnought was designed to single-handedly destroy entire enemy fleets, and it was just one ship in humanity's response. "Status report." Torres called to her bridge crew. "All ships reporting ready for immediate deployment," her first officer replied. "Logistics fleet is loaded with supplies for extended campaign. Engineering corps is prepared for planetary reconstruction. Marine divisions are equipped for hostile environment operations." Torres nodded. "And the special weapons? Harvester killer missiles are loaded and armed. Planetary reconstruction equipment is ready for deployment. We can begin terraforming operations within hours of arrival." As the First Fleet prepared to depart, similar scenes were playing out across human space. The Second Fleet left from Mars base. The Third Fleet departed from the Jupiter shipyards. Military bases that had been on peacetime status for decades suddenly became hives of activity as humanity prepared for the largest military operation in its history. But the most important preparation was happening on a small research station orbiting Neptune. Dr. Elizabeth Kane, Earth's leading expert on artificial intelligence and self-replicating technology, had been studying harvester remains for 20 years. She had always known that someday humanity would face them directly. "The harvesters have a fatal flaw," she explained to her research team as they prepared their equipment for deployment. "They're incredibly efficient at consuming and replicating, but they have no creativity. They follow programmed patterns and cannot adapt to truly novel threats. Dr. Kane smiled as she looked at the experimental weapons her team had developed. Fortunately for the Zethkari, humans specialize in being creative threats. Back at Nexus 7, Sarah Chen stood in her quarters, looking out at the shipping lanes while she waited for Earth's response to arrive. She had spent the last 6 hours fielding calls from various alien representatives, all asking the same questions. Was Earth really deploying its entire military? Did humans understand the scale of the threat they were facing? Were they prepared for a war that could last decades? Sarah's answer was always the same: we'll handle it. What the other species didn't understand was that phrase carried a weight in human culture that couldn't be easily translated. When humans said, we'll handle it, they meant they would solve the problem completely, permanently, and in a way that made sure it never happened again. The Zethkari had asked for help. As far as humanity was concerned, that made them family. And humans protected their family with everything they had. Overwhelming response. 6 days after Captain Sarah Chen's promise to the Galactic Trade Consortium, the early warning sensors at Nexus 7 began detecting something that made their operators think the equipment was malfunctioning. The readings showed a fleet approaching the station that was larger than anything in recorded galactic history. Ambassador Zethkar stood in the station's observation deck, his compound eyes straining to make sense of the sensor data displayed on the holographic screens around him. In the 6 days since Sarah Chen had made her promise, he had watched other species quietly withdraw their offers of assistance. Word had spread that humans were planning something big, and nobody wanted to be caught in the middle of whatever was coming. Run the scan again, Zethkar requested of the Altarian technician operating the sensors. Ambassador, I have run it 7 times, the technician replied, her blue skin paling with each scan. The results are consistent. 847 human warships in formation, approaching at maximum sublight speed. The largest vessel is 12 kilometers long. Zethkar pressed his face against the transparent aluminum viewport, looking out into space. At first, he could see nothing but stars. Then, slowly, the darkness began to change. Points of light appeared, growing larger and brighter as they approached. But these weren't stars. They were ships, more ships than Zethkar had ever seen in one place. The first vessels to become visible were the destroyers and cruisers, sleek predatory shapes bristling with weapon systems. Behind them came the battleships, massive angular constructs designed for one purpose: destroying enemy fleets. But even these paled in comparison to the dreadnoughts that followed, each one large enough to carry an entire city's population. And behind even these giants came something that defied Zethkar's understanding of military logistics. Support vessels, engineering ships, mobile shipyards, supply transports, hospital ships, and what appeared to be entire mobile colonies, all moving in perfect formation, as if they were a single organism. Open a channel to the fleet, Zethkar requested, his voice barely steady. The communication screen activated, showing the bridge of what was obviously the fleet's flagship. Admiral Rebecca Torres appeared on screen, her dark hair pulled back severely and her brown eyes holding an intensity that made Zethkar instinctively step back. Behind her, he could see dozens of human officers working at stations filled with technology he couldn't begin to understand. Ambassador Zethkar, Torres said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding vast military forces. I am Admiral Torres of the Earth Defense Force First Fleet. We're here to resolve your harvester problem. Zethkar struggled to find words. Admiral, the situation has deteriorated since we made our request. The harvesters have consumed 2 more colony worlds. Our remaining population has been reduced to 130 million. The mechanical swarms now number in the millions, and they're spreading to systems beyond our territory. Torres' expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Understood. We're prepared for that contingency. Admiral, Zethkar said hesitantly, I must ask, what exactly do you mean by resolve? For the first time, Torres smiled, And it was not a pleasant expression. "Ambassador, we're going to eliminate the harvester threat completely. Not just the swarms attacking your people, but every harvester in this sector of the galaxy. When we're finished, your species will never have to worry about them again." The communication screen went dark, leaving Zethkar staring at his own reflection in the blank display. Around him, representatives from dozens of species watched in stunned silence as the human fleet took positions around Nexus 7. The formation was unlike anything they had ever seen, suggesting coordination and planning on a scale that exceeded most civilizations' entire military capabilities. Council Prime Velterra approached Zethkar, her usually composed demeanor showing cracks of concern. "Ambassador, I think we may have underestimated the human response to your request." Before Zethkar could reply, every communication channel on the station activated simultaneously. Admiral Torres' voice filled every speaker in the complex. "Attention all personnel aboard Nexus 7. This is Admiral Torres of the Earth Defense Force. We are implementing immediate security protocols for your protection. The station is now under human military protection until the harvester threat has been eliminated." Around the station, human ships began deploying in defensive positions, but these weren't the careful, economical formations that other species used. The humans had positioned enough firepower around Nexus 7 to defend against an invasion fleet. They were treating a routine protection detail as if they expected a full-scale war. Captain Sarah Chen arrived at the observation deck wearing a military uniform that Zethkar had never seen her use before. Her typically friendly demeanor had been replaced by something harder, more focused. "Captain Chen," Velterra said carefully, "your fleet seems quite extensive for a rescue operation." Sarah looked out at the assembled human ships, and Zethkar could see pride mixed with something darker in her expression. "Council Prime, humans don't believe in half measures." The Zethkari asked for help. "They're going to get it." "But 800 ships," Velterra began. 847. Sarah corrected. "Plus support vessels, logistics fleet, engineering corps, medical ships, and colonial support. This is just the first wave." The assembled alien representatives stared at her in shock. This was just the first wave. How many ships did humanity have? Sarah activated a holographic display showing the human fleet deployment. "The first fleet will engage and destroy all harvester forces in Zethkari space. The second fleet will track the harvesters back to their origin point and eliminate the source. The third fleet will establish permanent defensive positions around all Zethkari worlds." "And the fourth fleet?" Zethkar asked, afraid of the answer. "We'll begin rebuilding your worlds," Sarah replied simply. "Better than they were before." Over the next several hours, Zethkar watched in amazement as the human response unfolded. It wasn't just a military operation. It was a complete systematic solution to every aspect of the harvester crisis. The first engagement occurred at Zeth Secondary, a colony world that had been under harvester attack for 2 weeks. The mechanical swarms had consumed most of the planet's surface and were in the process of dismantling the atmosphere when the human battle group arrived. Commander Jake Morrison led the attack from his heavy cruiser, the EDS Vengeance. The ship's advanced sensors detected over 3 million individual harvester units spread across the planet's surface and orbital space. "Harvester killer missiles armed and ready," his weapons officer reported. "Target all harvester concentrations," Morrison ordered. "Full spread." The missiles that launched from the human ships were unlike any weapons the galaxy had seen before. Instead of conventional explosives, they carried specialized nanobots designed specifically to destroy self-replicating machines. Each missile could eliminate thousands of harvesters while leaving everything else completely unharmed. Within minutes, the harvester swarms that had been consuming Zeth Secondary simply ceased to exist. The mechanical units shut down simultaneously as the human nanobots severed their communication networks and disabled their replication systems. But the humans weren't finished. As soon as the harvesters were eliminated, engineering ships moved into orbit and began atmospheric restoration. The planet's air, which had been partially consumed by the mechanical swarms, was cleaned and replenished. Soil that had been stripped of nutrients was treated with compounds that would restore its fertility. Dr. Elizabeth Kane supervised the restoration from her research vessel. Atmospheric composition restored to optimal levels, she reported. Soil treatment is proceeding ahead of schedule. The planet will be habitable within 48 hours. Zethkar, monitoring the operation from Nexus 7, could barely believe what he was seeing. The humans hadn't just defeated the harvesters, they had reversed the damage completely. Zeth Secondary would be not just habitable, but better than it had been before the attack. Similar scenes played out across Zethkari space as human battle groups systematically eliminated every harvester presence. But Admiral Torres had meant what she said about eliminating the threat completely. Using advanced tracking technology, human scouts followed the harvesters' communication signals back to their origin point, a massive automated factory in an uninhabited system 3 sectors away. The factory was enormous, a mechanical construct the size of a small moon that had been producing harvester swarms for centuries. It was protected by millions of defensive units and surrounded by warning buoys in a dozen galactic languages. Admiral Torres herself led the assault on the harvester factory. The Second Fleet, 400 ships strong, arrived in the system prepared for the battle of their lives. What they found instead was a target-rich environment. All ships, weapons free, Torres ordered. I want that factory reduced to component atoms. The human fleet opened fire with weapons that had been specifically designed for this moment. Quantum torpedoes that could disrupt the factory's molecular structure, particle beams that could cut through any material. And at the center of the attack, the flagship EDS Retribution fired its primary weapon, a directed energy beam that could crack planets. The Harvester factory, which had survived for centuries and produced countless billions of mechanical units, was destroyed in less than 20 minutes. As the debris cooled in space, human teams moved in to collect samples and ensure that no replication systems had survived. Factory destroyed, Torres reported to Fleet Command. No harvester signals detected in any neighboring systems. Threat has been eliminated. But even this overwhelming military response was only part of the human plan. While the battle fleets were destroying harvesters, the engineering corps had begun the largest terraforming project in galactic history. Every world that had been touched by the harvesters was not just restored but improved. Human technology replaced what had been lost with systems that were more efficient, more beautiful, and more resistant to future attacks. Cities were rebuilt with architecture that blended Zethkari artistic sensibilities with human defensive technology. The most dramatic transformation occurred on Zeth Prime itself, the Zethkari homeworld. What had been a beautiful but defenseless planet became something unprecedented, a fortress world that could defend itself against any conceivable threat while maintaining its natural beauty. Admiral Torres met with Zethkar on the rebuilt surface of Zeth Prime 3 months after the human fleet's arrival. The planet looked much as it had before the Harvester attack, with its crystal forests and singing valleys restored. But now there were also defensive installations hidden throughout the landscape, weapon systems disguised as natural formations, and a planetary shield that could protect against anything short of a stellar explosion. Admiral Torres, Zethkar said, his voice full of wonder as he looked out over his restored homeworld. I do not understand. We asked for rescue, but you have given us something beyond our dreams. Why? Torres looked up at the sky, where human patrol ships maintained constant vigilance. Ambassador, my species learned long ago that there are 2 ways to solve a problem. You can treat the symptoms, or you can eliminate the cause. Other species chose to treat the symptoms. We chose to eliminate the cause. But the resources you have spent, the time, the effort, we can never repay this debt. Torres turned to look at him directly. There is no debt. You asked for help, and we helped. That's what civilized species do for each other. As Torres spoke, Zethkar realized that humanity had just redefined what help meant on a galactic scale. The other species had offered token assistance that would have prolonged the crisis without solving it. Humans had committed resources that exceeded the military capabilities of entire star empires, and they had done it for a species they barely knew. "There is one thing I must ask," Zethkar said. "Will human forces remain in our space permanently?" Torres smiled, and for the first time it was a warm expression. "Ambassador, Earth has established a permanent base in this system. As far as humanity is concerned, the Zethkari are now under our protection. Anyone who threatens you will have to deal with us." 6 months after the crisis began, representatives from across the galaxy gathered once again at Nexus 7. But this time, they came not to offer inadequate assistance, but to witness the results of the human response. The Zethkari civilization had not just survived. It had been transformed. Their worlds were more beautiful and more secure than ever before. Their population, which had been reduced to a few 100 million refugees, was growing again as families were reunited and new cities were built. Council Prime Velterra stood before the assembled representatives and spoke words that would be remembered for generations. "Let the record show that when the Zethkari faced extinction, one species responded with everything they had. Let the record show that humanity's definition of help exceeds what most of us would consider an act of war." Ambassador Zethkar had the final word. "My people have a new saying now. When someone promises to help, we ask them, 'Do you mean help, or do you mean human help?' Because we have learned that there is a significant difference." As the representatives departed, Captain Sarah Chen remained on the observation deck, looking out at the shipping lanes that were once again busy with peaceful trade. The human fleet had withdrawn to defensive positions, but everyone knew they were still there, watching and waiting. Sarah's communicator chimed with a message from Earth. Another species in a distant sector was facing extinction from a different threat. They had heard about the Zethkari rescue and were asking if humanity might consider offering assistance. Sarah smiled as she composed her reply. It was the same message she had sent 6 months ago, the same promise that had changed the galaxy's understanding of what help really meant. "We'll handle it,"